Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 187 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host today, Bill Sutton. I have a couple of new faces and voices with me today, both from XenTegra. So I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. We'll start first with Randy Price. Randy, you want to just say hello to the listeners and introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hey guys, Randy Price. I'm a solutions architect with XenTegra. Been with the company for, let's say, or we'll just say around 8 years. Been working with Citrix technology since the WinFrame days. So we'll just say 20 something years at this point. So,
Yeah, 20-something years, Randy. You're starting to show your age, buddy.
I know. I just kind of lost count after 20. I just stopped counting, So
Yeah, that's a good way to go about it for sure.
right.
Also, you heard that laughter in the background. That is the inimitable Stuart Donaldson, who's also on the XenTegra team. Stu, you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Stu Donaldson, been with the company since April. So what? That's almost 6 months now, Bill.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Time flies. It's, I'd say 19, 20 years with end user compute and Citrix technologies. I don't go all the way back to where you're at, Randy, although I looks like I have more gray than you do. MetaFrame XPE days, I guess.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, we got a wealth of experience at XenTegra, particularly around EUC platforms, and of course, specifically in terms of today for Citrix. So, as this is called the Citrix Session, we focus on new blog articles and information from Citrix systems. So today is no different. We're going to cover a blog article from August 19th. Entitled Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops 2507 Long-Term Service Release is now available. Get current, stay ahead. This article is by Abhilash Verma. I think he's probably a product manager or product marketing manager, I'm not sure, from Citrix. And it's his blog article. So this is pretty timely. 2507 is the latest long-term service release that Citrix came out with. I guess it was last month, maybe. So we're going to talk about some of the things that are in this, generally speaking, and then of course we can point our listeners to specific details. And of course, as always, and I'll say this at the end as well, but might as well say it now. If you have questions about anything we discuss, need additional information, what have you, you're welcome to reach out to your XenTegra account rep, or you can reach out to any of the three of us on this call or on this podcast. All right. So any thoughts? Let's just start at the beginning. Relative to 2507, Randy, you want to take this? What you want to explain to the listeners what a long-term service release is?
Sure. So Citrix has really two different release cycles, right? We have our current release and we have what's called our long-term service release. Long-term service releases typically will have 5 years of mainstream support. They just recently changed that to where typically you'll have one LTSR per year,
Right.
and then the other releases will be the current releases. And those are typically 18 months of GA support from the time they're released. So,
exactly.
If you're a customer and you're looking for a release that is stable, that's been vetted, right? That you're going to get long, just like the name says, long-term service, right? Or support. That's going to be this LTSR version.
So how does that relate to DAS?
So funny. So DAS is always running the current release, right? So they're always, as new updates, feature sets come out, Citrix is always innovating and adding those features directly to Citrix DAS. This is going to, and from a Citrix DAS environment, this is going to relate more to the VDAs, right? So the version of the VDA that you're running on the infrastructure, as well as Citrix Workspace app on the endpoint side.
Right. Yeah. And if you're running something like on-prem provisioning services or something like that, then that would need to be kept up to date as well. But
exactly.
Yeah, the long-term service release, it used to be every 3 years, I think, wasn't it?
Well, it was, they said, typically it was around, 24 months.
Okay.
Around that. Okay. But there was always a desire to have, because, as these current releases came out and they added new features, because typically, if you think about it, all the current releases were typically where new features were added, and the long-term service release was like a culmination of the previous current releases, and it was, kind of validated, if you will.
Yeah, I think you guys may agree here. We see the long-term service releases obviously in larger organizations that have got strict change control
Yep.
policies and procedures. We see them frequently in healthcare where they'll go with an LTSR simply because it's much more difficult for a large healthcare organization to spin up a new release on a 6-month basis or a 1-year basis than it is every few years. So we saw most of these LTSRs, or we see most of the LTSRs in these large organizations. Given that now they're going to be released every year, we may see that change, I would expect.
Yeah. And the nice thing about it is just the fact that, if I'm on a long-term service release and there's a feature that comes out in a current release, I can upgrade to the current release and then go back to the long-term service release. So it gives you the flexibility, right, to choose in the event that there is a certain feature or functionality that you're needing within your environment. So,
okay. I was looking at this earlier, and to me, I think this change has got to be related to just the sheer volume of releases that or new features that they've added to LTSR. I think this one has like 400 updates or something along those lines. 400 enhancements, I think, is what I read.
And we're not going to cover all those on this call. So.
No, but it speaks to a more rapid cadence with the LTSR version. So
yeah, for sure. All right, so the first section of the blog article, as mentioned, is entitled "It All Starts with Exceptional User Experiences." So, one of the things that Citrix has been focused on for many years is improving the end user experience, and this release is no different. Obviously, a bad user experience hurts productivity. It results in frustrated users, and we all know what that's like, and we don't want to have to deal with those, and we don't want our users to have to deal with those. So HDX technology is what Citrix calls their protocol, if you will. It's an extension of the old ICA protocol that was the original one developed back in the early days of Citrix. So they have made some pretty significant changes to HDX. Per this article, users should be a noticeable drop in round trip time, which obviously means the response time for their keystrokes and mouse movements and so forth will be a lot faster. And obviously, lower complaints may mean higher employee satisfaction, hopefully. Another thing that was introduced, well, any of you guys want to comment on this in terms of the HDX enhancements, either specifically or generally? Okay.
I think you said most of everything. I mean, the round trip latency the round trip time is the easiest thing from a end user experience, I would say. There's some management stuff in there that I really is improvement to what admins see.
Yeah. They also introduced HDX Direct, which is a little bit different approach to how users connect, because why don't one of you guys talk about how users connect using the cloud or on-prem and what HDX Direct does for the customer?
Yeah, I can take that. So today, right, if you're we'll talk about gateway service and using it with Citrix DaaS. So typically with the gateway service, there's a couple of things. If I'm sitting on an internal network and I'm accessing a resource on the internal network, you would have to define direct workload connections, right? Where you go in and define your network connections to be able to have that direct network connectivity. Otherwise, all those sessions are going out, outbound through the internet, hitting the gateway service and coming back inbound.
So basically a hairpin.
Exactly. Right. And depending upon whether you're using rendezvous protocol, that's either being proxied through the cloud connectors or the VDAs are registering directly with the gateway service.
Right.
HDX Direct is similar sort of technology, except for instead of having to go to find those networks, right? Essentially, they're going to exchange a list of IP addresses, and the client will automatically try to connect and see which one of those that it can connect to. There's some other sort of technical details in that, but at a high level, that's what HDX Direct. Think of it as a replacement for direct workload access without having to go in and actually specify those networks. So
Gotcha. Yeah, and the article talks a little bit here about the integration of Uber Agent, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But Uber Agent is essentially a significantly expanded monitoring tool. So you have Director, right, for your within DaaS or within CBAD. Uber Agent gives you more metrics by deploying an agent to your endpoints, and it can monitor endpoints as well as your VDAs, right, guys? Okay. All right. The next section, security for your distributed workforce. So obviously security has been enhanced in this LTSR significantly. Probably the biggest thing that's been enhanced here is Secure HDX, which is end-to-end encryption for all the data in transit. And this is part of the deployment of the LTSR and the VDA. You need your VDAs at 2507. You need your LTSR 2507. And I would suspect, even though it doesn't say this here, that you need the latest workspace app. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, they mentioned Secure HDX, but that was actually released in the current release 2503. So I think they're providing some enhancements. Again, it's a long-term service release, so any of those current release feature functionality. But just to kind of clarify, I think on the VDA side, you need 2503 or later. But,
okay. Okay, good. Yeah, so that's a good point.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Randy, because a lot of the features that we're seeing in 2507 are basic in the LTSR are basically features that were already in the CRs,
correct.
Which is the way it's kind of always been, and that'll continue to be the case. Except the LTSRs will now be every year instead of every 2 or 3 years.
Right. Yep.
So you won't be as far behind as it were in terms of the latest features. So since this feature Secure HDX was in 2503, as long as you had 2503 or later VDAs, you'd basically have this capability. And do you know off the top of your head, Randy, is this a automatic turn on? Is this turned on automatically, or does a policy need to be set to turn this on?
There's policies.
Okay.
Policies, yeah.
That's what I figured.
Policies, yes. It'll be interesting to see the use cases not use cases, the adoption of things like passkeys that were added in, which is, obviously a big thing and from a security standpoint. Hopefully we'll see passkeys take over more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that? What is a passkey?
Well, it's essentially a device-based way for you to get rid of passwords, right? It's a device certificate based, I believe. But end result is it eliminates some of the downsides of having passwords, especially for users out there that like to use the same password for everything.
Yeah. So another aspect of 2507 LTSR, which may have also been incorporated into earlier versions, is this device trust. A device trust is an entitlement that customers get by virtue of having universal hybrid multi-cloud licensing or the Citrix platform license. Device trust is a pretty powerful tool that allows for policies to be based on various factors of the endpoint, as well as other elements. But it can determine, like, for example, if the user connects and then they turn on a snipping tool or something on their endpoint, device trust can essentially lock the session. Or if they turn off their firewall, or if their antivirus crashes, this is on their endpoint, or they stop the antivirus tool for some reason. It has all kinds of things that can do to control the access to the VDA. It can also be used as a tool just for the endpoint. So it can lock your endpoints or send messages if you violate any sort of dynamic policy control. And any additional, want to say anything additional about that, Randy or Stu?
I was just going to mention that from a device trust perspective, right, it's a little different. I mean, we've always had this context checking if the endpoint, right, sort of integration, if you will, from a NetScaler or device posture scan, where at authentication, there's some checking going on to make sure you meet certain criteria. But with the integration with device trust, now, we can continually check the context of that device, during the duration of the session. So that just kind of extends beyond just the authentication aspect. So if anything changes within the context, previously we weren't able to detect that. Now with device trust, if anything changes on the context of that endpoint during the duration of the session, then you can make some determinations and actions to remediate. So
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like I don't want to say Citrix is playing catch up here, because that's not what I'm insinuating, but it seems to be a big push in the industry right now to not only look at what makes the context up for an individual user at any given time, but really focus on that immediacy, the immediacy of that context checkings, because it's very easy to change the way, like you said, disable your firewall or disable antivirus or something along those lines after you've already gone through those checks. So definitely an added layer of security.
Yeah, it's kind of constantly looking at what's happening on the endpoint and determining whether or not any of that violates security rules or checks
right.
that are put in place by the administrators. One of the ones I find interesting is this concept of, and I'm going to use the wrong term probably, but geofencing. for geo tracking, so it can actually look at the location of the device, and if it changes, if all of a sudden the device looks like it should be accessed from the United States entirely, and all of a sudden it's accessing from Asia or somewhere, it may flag that for an administrator or even deny the user access until they've obtained an exception, so they can make sure that they are actually who they say they are, where they say they are, than some hacker that got access to credentials. Next section is reducing IT overhead. So this is again comes under the category of doing more with less. And this has a lot to do with provisioning and image management, or among other things. And I'm not really familiar with this, Randy or Stu. I don't know if you guys are. IT teams can now manage a single prepared image across different cloud and on-prem environments. Does that resonate with you guys? Do you know what they're talking about there?
Yeah, within Citrix DAS, right, you have the capability to configure images or image management service, and to be able, that's been around, but I think that they're just extending that. I'm assuming that's what he's referring to there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But having the capability to take an image, use it across multiple, cloud providers, multiple, environments. Essentially, in the past, if you had multiple environments, if I was in the cloud and I was on-prem and had to manage multiple images, with the image management service, my assumption is that he's kind of referring to the ability to integrate, or some more integrations there specifically. But that would give you the capability to have an image that you then could, the image management service will allow you to take that image and sort of replicate it, if you will, to these other platforms. So again, just sort of reducing that, administrative overhead of having to maintain multiple images across multiple platforms. So.
Right. Yeah, I saw something today, actually, when I was going through this article. There is a under the I think it's under the new features, there is a reference to being able to leverage, I think it's Red Hat OpenShift.
Yeah.
So that you'll now be able to do image management with Red Hat OpenShift. So I think that's kind of what they were referring to when they said major cloud providers and virtualization platforms. I mean, Citrix DAS or Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops has always supported VMware and Xen Server, of course, and then Nutanix and the cloud hypervisors. Right. I think Citrix is looking at some of the newer players that have come into the market with the Broadcom acquisition and some other macroeconomic factors, and started to explore other virtualization platforms. And I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, but nevertheless.
Is this tied to the image portability service? I think that's what they used to call it, right? Image portability services, or portability workflow, right, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So the next thing under reducing IT overhead really is talking about some of the things that are the new things that are in Director, much deeper insights into user sessions and network conditions. And they have this session topology view, which I looked at, I think, recently, and it's essentially almost like a chart, right, Randy or Stu? It shows the various stages of the log-on process, or the stages of what have you, and it shows the latency along the trail. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
It really dives in. Even if you're using gateway service, shows you how much latency is between your endpoint to the gateway service to your backend infrastructure. They talk about extending it 24 hours. Previously, it was like 24 hours worth of data that you were able to see, right? And so now having the capability to go back.
Right.
And I think a lot of that, one, you have Uber Agent, right, through that acquisition, and I think they're, using some of those metrics that you were able to gather from within Uber Agent and continually to update, Director, and monitor. But also having the ability to integrate with Uber Agent as well from an endpoint perspective, and just getting it deeper into what's happening from a visibility perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was at the Citrix Connect event in DC a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about Uber Agent in terms of being able to take some of the information that it is capturing and leverage it for Director. So that even if you don't have the full Uber Agent deployment with the consoles and Splunk and everything else that's needed, which that's pretty much it, right? And the agents to do an Uber Agent rollout, you are getting some benefit in Director, and they intend to expand that up to a point. Obviously, deep insight into network level metrics are probably not going to end up in Director. You'll need Uber Agent for the full deployment of Uber Agent for that. But they are adding a lot of features, or a lot of information into Director that leverages the Uber Agent piece that runs on the VDA.
And that's getting installed. Uber Agent, Device Trust, all that's getting installed in the VDA as well as Citrix Workspace app, right? Just kind of as they continually develop those. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you install Workspace app 2507 and you go into add or remove programs or apps after you've done it, you'll see the Workspace app, but you'll also see the Device Trust agent, and you'll see the Uber Agent if you do just a default install. Now, there are ways to run the installer manually that can keep those from installing, but if you've got a UHMC license, you should go ahead and install them, both of them. They're very lightweight, and they're there in case you need them or to capture that additional data that may be leveraged by Uber Agent.
One of the things people are going to like a lot, guys, is the enhanced visibility into team sessions, like the unified communication session. So you could see, what a user's experience looks like, perhaps, the type of latency that's on there. I haven't seen all the different things that it's going to show you, but Director will have additional information in there for those Teams calls. Yeah,
good point. Stu, you must have looked into the additional features here as well, or maybe you just picked that up. But Microsoft Call Quality Dashboard for monitoring and troubleshooting, I happen to see that. That's going to be included in Director going forward with the 2507, although that might have been in the earlier releases, an earlier CR as well.
They also, and I don't see it called out here, there was something interesting that I saw was their Citrix Assistant. Did you guys see that as well in the features?
No, I haven't seen that.
So
I haven't seen the features, but I heard something about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an application. It's basically a GUI interface for the end users, right? And it's allowed them to basically get information around their session to try to optimize. So it does require the WEM agent, but essentially they go in, optimize CPU and memory, and it'll give them information around what's their session like, right? Do I need to clean up old files? So it's around trying to enable the end user, right, when they're having any sort of session performance or troubleshooting sort of issues. So
interesting.
I thought that was pretty cool. Just from an end user perspective, to try to empower the end users. I'm kind of curious if in the future they'll add some AI into that as well, right? So,
I imagine they will.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Great. So next is tangible infrastructure cost savings. So this is referencing some of the improvements in CPU and memory usage with the latest version, LTSR 2507. When I was again at the Connect event in DC a couple of weeks ago, they talked about this, and they actually put an email, actually I think it might have been a LinkedIn post up on the screen of a customer that actually, after they implemented the 2507 VDA, they actually did some testing of that compared side by side with a VDA from an older release on another similar hardware, not on the same cluster, but a different cluster, but the exact same hardware. And they were able to determine that these were real. These are real. They were getting 17, 18, 16% lower memory footprint for the same workloads on the same platforms. So clearly the code has been tightened up some, and you're seeing much better much better CPU usage and memory usage, which obviously translates into power and cooling over time, particularly in larger environments. Any comments on those, guys? No?
Yeah, I'm wondering how much, do you know if in that situation they were using session recording? Because I know with multi-core support now and some other things, especially with larger environments, that should greatly reduce the load on the backend infrastructure for those environments that are doing the session recording. And, if I think about when it first came out years and years ago, I'm not sure that I can't remember exactly the reason, but we didn't do it because it didn't seem like it was something that was going to provide enough value. That's way back when I was in the enterprise space. But to me, the conversations have increased a lot over the last couple of years with regard to how can I implement this? What's it going to take? How much storage on the back end? Is it going to really hit performance? So I imagine this will help out a good chunk of clients.
Yeah, I think so.
You mentioned session recording. One of the other things that they mentioned that's not in this article or that's been released that's in preview is session recording for endpoints.
Yes.
But that's going to be interesting, right? So that's a sort of a newer feature functionality. It does require, again, Citrix Workspace app. There's some configuration, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure at this point, just because, again, it's in preview. But it's kind of written that it requires NetScaler and Storefront So, that'll be something that's interesting as well coming up, to be able to not only record your Citrix sessions, right? Because that's something that, to Sue's point, a lot of customers are looking at because of the capability from a compliance perspective, right? To have these triggers to initiate, recording of sessions. But now the capability to also do that on endpoint devices is pretty interesting. So,
this is the first. This kind of goes back to some of the statements that we've made in the past on these podcasts, that sometimes those of us who are on them learn stuff just by doing them. And I didn't know this was a thing yet, Randy. So
okay, yeah,
I had missed this. So this is great. Be interesting to see how it works. I have to read through this article, on the documentation. It's in preview, but if any of our listeners are interested, you can go to the docs.citrix.com, and under 2507 LTSR, find session recording and go to what's new, and it'll tell you all about this new feature for endpoint devices, as well as what's new in the one for the VDAs.
And I heard some, I can't remember who, it was a conversation with an ATS the other day, or if I read it, but let's take a workflow where somebody copies a file out of the Citrix session directly onto the desktop. Session recording can actually watch what happens to that file after the fact, to continue, your ability to maintain compliance and know where your data is and all that fun stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how that feature kind of evolves over the course of the next couple of versions.
Right. So next in this section of the article, there is some statements made about modernization of licensing with the new cloud-based model. We are all very familiar with this. This is the new license activation service from Citrix. One of you guys want to take that and run with it? Explain it briefly?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll take it then. Yeah, so very quickly, and if you didn't, to go deeper, definitely go back and check out the previous podcast because we covered this.
Right.
So, but Citrix has actually, and one thing, well, before I get too far in this, one thing I was going to call out is, as Citrix releases any of these, current releases as well as LTSRs, on the eDocs that Bill was showing when he was going over and getting, some of the information, they also include what's being deprecated, right? So if you go back over there and you look at under what's new, go back to keep going back. There you go.
Deprecation under 2507.
Yep. You'll actually see in 2507, file-based licensing was deprecated, right? And so this is a great place to go and get some information. You can see here as well, Get Broker Machine was deprecated. It was replaced by Get Broker Machine V2. But this is a great place just to get some information around what's changed, right? And what's being deprecated from a release perspective. But again, file-based licensing, it has been deprecated. What this means is if you're a customer and you're using Citrix virtual apps and desktops, right? Xen server, provisioning services, Unicon, those sort of solutions that require file-based licensing, moving forward, you have until April 15th to convert over to essentially upgrade to a supported version that supports what they call a license activation service. So again, won't get too deep into that, but definitely go back and check out the previous podcast. We dive into this pretty deep, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And again, if you're using any of those solutions today, definitely want to make sure you upgrade to a supported version. And this also includes the NetScaler as well and NetScaler console, right? So if you run, or ADM, if you're running those on-prem. So there's specific versions that you need to be at to be able to support the license activation, because again, Citrix has announced that deprecation. Everything's moving to more of a traditional sort of modern model, right? So that is through that license activation service.
Right. Okay, next section talks briefly about Unicon. Again, this is an entitlement of the Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud licensing SKU as well as the Citrix platform licensing SKU. This is the Unicon is an endpoint operating system that is designed to run on what we would term typically thin clients, but it can run on just about any x86, almost an E86, x86 hardware. Here Citrix is talking about cutting replacement costs of hardware significantly. And of course, ELUX being owned by Citrix now. Again, Unicon is the name of the former company. ELUX is the endpoint operating system that runs on the endpoint. And ELUX is really now being owned by Citrix. It it's going to be designed end to end to operate very well with the Citrix platform. Any thoughts on Unicon or ELUX? I know we're still kind of getting more and more familiar with that day by day, right, guys?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the question most people are asking is when we're going to get more information on the tighter integration. Now, it generically says in here that it's, more tightly integrated with the Citrix platform. We all know that it's gonna improve over the course of time, but things like the separate consoles and whatnot, when are we going to start seeing that? Is it going to be one of those things where we finally get to, manage everything on the DAS console, for example, that would be great stuff, because those are the questions I'm hearing is, I got another console and this, that, and the other. So,
right. So the last section here is really just kind of it's a beginning of the summary, and we kind of already talked about this, the concept of the LTSR. In the past, it was every couple of years before when they released them, 2 years, 24 months, 28 months sometimes. Yep. Now they're going to an annual cadence, so there'll be an LTSR released each year, so that those that are using the LTSR will get the benefit of being able to take advantage of the new features and functionality that come out every 6 months or so with the CRs. So a lot quicker access to the releases. Finally, the last thing is just to make sure that all our listeners know that 2507 LTSR is available now. This is not a preview. This is out there to be downloaded. I downloaded a couple of weeks ago, put it in my lab. I haven't had any issues with it. Of course, my lab is tiny, so I'm not doing a big, huge test on it. But of course, this includes, for those of you that might be back on older versions like 1912 or something like that, this includes the Web Studio. So you no longer really have to deal with the MMC console. I think it's still there, but mostly you leverage the Web Studio, which is very familiar and very similar to the cloud-based console, and much more friendly to use and designed much more modularly. Any final thoughts or comments, guys?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that you talk about the MMC-based studio, right? They actually did deprecate that back in 2411. So moving forward, it will all just be Web Studio. I think they're just trying to, from a development perspective, trying to keep it in line with what they have from a DAS perspective, and probably, one that I see that as a benefit for, customers that are on-prem that still have not yet to migrate to DAS, because it's going to be a very similar sort of, admin experience, if you will. But
right. So the last thing here is there's some links in the blog article, which will be included in the show notes, regarding the deeper dive into the features, documentation, and technical deep dives, which are probably on the Community Tech Zone site. Yes, they are. So just make sure you look at the article, and if you have any questions about any of these items, don't hesitate to reach out to your XenTegra sales rep if you have one. If you don't, you can reach out to any of us that are on this call. That's all I've got. Any final thoughts, guys? Randy, I'll start with you.
No, I think there's, Citrix is doing a lot. Like I said, they continue to innovate. I guess the biggest thing is, if you have yet to upgrade and you're running 1912 or one of the versions that doesn't support license activation service, now it's time to upgrade, right? Yeah. So 2507 is here. So
good. Yeah. Stu?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Randy was just saying. I think the biggest thing for me is constantly seeing the evolution of the platform and then finding ways to improve it still, right? I mean, I think that at a certain point, we see Citrix or other virtualization technologies like this, and we're like, okay, what else can they do to either improve the end user experience or make the admin experience better, right? And to see, 400, like we said, enhancements into this LTSR, it's impressive that they're coming up with new ways every single release to make the product even better than it is. And, leader right now.
I've said it on this podcast before that Citrix has not stopped. They continue to innovate. With every release, there's new features, new functionality, enhancements of existing features. So hopefully we'll see that continue in addition to adding new products and new functionality. But it's all a good thing. We customers benefit when things like this, these changes like this get made. So that's the end goal here, right, guys?
Yeah.
Right. All right. That's all we got for today. Thank you all for listening. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Stu, for handling this with me today. And we'll be back with you again next week, hopefully.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.